Crossing the Silent Sky by Edwina Longbottom. Chapter 1, The Ascent. The sky over London was the color of burned lavender when Jonas Calder arrived at the aerodrome. Evening had laid itself across the city, soft and expectant, like a stage curtain waiting to rise. A crowd gathered along the rail embankments, necks craned, hats tipped back, as if attending the departure of royalty. But it was not royalty they had come to witness. It was the future. Suspended against the deepening violet sky floated the RMS Valkyrie, sleek, vast, silver, and impossibly elegant. Gas-filled cells beneath a polished hull, gondola windows gleaming like the eyes of a calm, colossal creature. Not merely a vessel, a declaration. The air age would not be denied. Jonas paused midway up the embarkation ramp, his coat collar turned up against the cool breeze. He had boarded airships before, many times in the years he wore a uniform and a purpose. But this was different. He was here as a passenger, a man meant to sit, to eat, to sleep, to breathe gently and harmlessly. The idea unsettled him more than it should have. He stepped aboard. The entry hall gave way to polished teak flooring, walls of oiled walnut, light fixtures of brushed brass and frosted glass. Everything softened the senses, quieting thought. The design was intentional. Luxury was not comfort. Luxury was permission to stop thinking. Jonas did not stop thinking. He rarely did. A steward approached with a pleasant smile and a bow of just the right depth. "Cabin number, sir?" 17, Jonas replied. "Right along the starboard corridor. Supper service begins in 40 minutes. We expect a smooth climb to cruising altitude. Enjoy your journey with us." Jonas nodded his thanks and moved past him. The moment the steward believed the exchange was finished, the smile fell from his face, an expression slipping back into neutrality, duty, fatigue. Everyone was performing here, Jonas included. His cabin was modest by the Valkyrie standards. One bed, a small writing desk, a brass-framed window overlooking the dimming city. He set his valise on the rack above the bunk and stood a moment with his hand pressed to the cool glass. The city below flickered with gaslight and early electric bulbs. Carriages and motorcars alike moved along the roads in a restless choreography. A place that always wanted, always pulled, always demanded. The sky did not demand. The sky waited. Jonas exhaled. He did not want to be returning to Cairo. The city held consequences he had spent years outmaneuvering. But the documents in his possession, a sealed folio now tucked deep in the lining of his valise, required personal delivery, responsibility. The one thing Jonas no longer trusted himself to hold. He left the cabin before the walls could remind him of himself. The promenade lounge was already growing lively, laughter drifting like perfume, crystal glasses chiming, orchestral strings rising softly from the musicians' dies. The passengers were already sorting themselves into their familiar social arrangements. The retired colonel telling embellished war stories, the American oil wife glittering with diamonds in daylight, the young honeymoon couple speaking in stage whispers, the businessmen who would pretend this trip was essential. Jonas recognized them all without needing names. He took a seat at the observation rail, the one overlooking clouds rather than conversation. And that was when a man he had never seen before sat down beside him as though they were already acquainted. Tall, comfortably built, middle-aged, clothes tailored with precision but not vanity. Mr. Emery, though Jonas did not yet know the name. The man had the look of someone who could tell a story so well that people would remember the story long after they forgot who told it. "Beautiful sight, isn't it?" Emery asked. His tone held warmth, but no press of expectation. Jonas did not respond immediately. He had learned that silence was often the most revealing answer. Finally, "It is," Jonas agreed, "though most beauty is improved by distance." Emery smiled. Not a wide smile, not a vain smile, the smile of someone who enjoyed being spoken to honestly. "You sound like a man familiar with heights," Emery said. Jonas didn't look at him. "I've been above the clouds before." "Did you like it?" A pause. Jonas considered that. "No," he said, "I didn't." Emery glanced at him, not offended, not probing, simply acknowledging. "Then perhaps now is a chance to change the memory," he said. Jonas did not reply. He could feel the memory trying to surface, the warning he ignored, the moment of choice, the sound of tearing metal, the sudden, rushing quiet. He pressed his hand to the rail, grounding himself. The orchestra shifted into a waltz. The Valkyrie tilted slightly upward. They were beginning the true ascent now. Emery watched the sky. Jonas watched his reflection in the glass. The promenade lounge unfurled like a postcard from the future. Cut crystal vases with pale roses, a piano lacquered to a black mirror, a brass-framed bar that reflected 100 small conversations. The Valkyrie didn't merely offer transit. She offered a stage where the world could perform being calm. Mr. Emery belonged to this stage like a lead in a Noel Coward piece. Warm, attentive, generous with his attention in a way that made people feel briefly more interesting than they were. He remembered names with eerie precision, asked questions that never sounded like inquiries, and could laugh with the loud, flirt gently with the shy, and never once make anyone feel small. Jonas drifted at the edge of tables and velvet banquettes the way a stone stands just outside the current. He watched Emery work a circle of people, an American couple en route to Cairo for the antiquities and the gossip, a young wireless operator hitching passage to a new post, a diamond-brooched widow who announced she was quite done with men, present company accepted, and then winked at the room. Emery listened more than he spoke. That was his trick. When he did speak, it was to lift the moment, not claim it. Emery, to the widow, then we shall consider you retired with honors and reserve the right to call you back to service if morale dips. Laughter, glasses raised. Jonas took the empty place at the corner of their table out of politeness, not hunger. The supper appeared in careful waves, consommé so clear it reflected the chandeliers, lamb done perfectly once and never again, a lemon tart that surrendered at the touch of a fork. The orchestra found an elegant waltz, something with confidence and no urgency. Across the room, Captain Renzo Marceau entered with 2 officers, uniform crisp as ironed certainty. He was a tall man built like a boundary, with eyes that measured crowds as if they might be weather. He accepted compliments lightly, he declined invitations to sit, he spoke briefly to the pianist as one might address a tide. When he passed Emery's table, he paused, and Emery, already half standing, offered the captain a toast to safe skies and the quiet hum of competence. Captain Marceau, to both, he said, and allowed a small, unguarded smile, and to passengers who trust us even when they shouldn't. Laughter again, not nervous. The kind of laughter that happens a step away from a cliff when the view is too beautiful to be afraid. Near the bar, a nun in a dark traveling habit sat with a cup of tea and the patience of someone who has waited longer for larger things. Sister Augustine watched people the way librarians watch a reading room, gently, with cataloging kindness. Twice, Jonas caught her eyes on him. Twice, she did not look away first. The final new arrival at the evening's margins was a man in a worn tweed jacket, a sharpened pencil behind one ear, a notebook whose corners were softened by years of being open to the truth and closed on the lie. Nathaniel Shaw. He took notes without writing. That is to say, he watched as if the page were already beneath his hand. When he finally ordered a drink, he did it with the hesitation of a man bargaining with insomnia. Shaw, to the barman, less gin than you think I want, more lemon than you think I deserve. The barman grinned and made exactly that. Emery noticed Shaw's notebook and struck like a benevolent magnet. Journalist, sir? Recovering. I'll be your relapse, Emery. Shaw. Will you immortalize us all, Mr. Shaw? Only if you say something worth the ink. The ink will outlive us. Let it be kind. It was shameless and charming, and somehow true. It made the widow dab at her eye and announce she had never wept over soup before. Jonas listened the way a man stands near an orchestra and feels the bass in his ribs. He drank water. He smiled when it was polite. He answered 2 questions about Cairo with sentences that could survive cross-examination. He said nothing about aircraft, altitude, or the way thin air makes men certain of things that kill them. Only for a heartbeat. Emery's head tilted. Captain Marceau glanced at the ceiling. The pianist sustained a chord to cover a near-to-nothing stutter in the current. Something in the hull's deep breath changed pitch and then returned to itself. She's climbing true. You've an ear for it? I've an affection for things carrying us farther than we have the right to go. He raised his glass, not to the room, but to the idea of staying aloft. Jonas didn't raise his. He knew too much about gravity to toast defiance.
The Valkyrie sailed into clouds so gently that first-timers gasped only on delay, when white surrounded every window in an intimacy no wall can manage. The lounge thinned, Laughter drifted to cabins. The captain made a brief appearance at the promenade rail for those who wished to ask if the weather would be a bother. He soothed their questions with the confidence only a liar or a wise man can manage. Jonas suspected Marceau was both in the correct proportions. Emery found Jonas again at the observation window, as if tours of duty were being changed. The cloud, illuminated by the Valkyrie's exterior lamps, resembled a continent of milk. The light did not so much shine through as into, returning in soft layers like a secret rephrased for politeness. They'll wake early tomorrow to watch sunrise above weather. They'll swear it began just for them. People always think the sky is a mirror. And you? What do you think it is? A good listener and a poor confessor. Emery laughed quietly. It was gratitude for honesty again, not ridicule. You're difficult to place, Miss. Calder. Mr. Calder, allow me to be mistaken about you a little longer. He said it in the affectionate tone that forgives the next 3 mistakes yet to be made. They stood together in companionable silence. It might even have been peace if Jonas weren't a man to whom silence is just the space in which consequences rehearse. A child's marble, the color of smoke and pearl, rolled across the lounge carpet from nowhere in particular and came to rest against Jonas's shoe. He bent, picked it up, and turned to see who might claim it. No child, no parent calling a name. Only Sister Augustine, who nodded once as if counting acquisitions in a ledger, and Shaw, who saw everything and wrote down nothing. Finders keepers. Jonas, I've no use for charm. Spoken like a man who has enough of it without trying. He left the marble on the rail to dome a reflection of the lamps. For a blink, the little globe held the lounge upside down, the people, the glasses, the pianist, the sky that was not a sky so much as an absence with polite edges.
They were crossing an altitude Jonas felt rather than measured, a layer where sound thins and the air permits fewer mistakes. He looked to the far window and saw a fleeting shape, no detail, only motion moving with the ship and then gone. A reflection, surely, or the eye making a parable of fog. Emery watched him not watching it. What's the cure for worry at 5,000 feet, Jonas? Descent. And if descent is not an option? Jonas did not answer. Emery's warmth had a peculiar effect. It coaxed truth, but declined to punish it. People relaxed around him because the room improved. Jonas envied the trick. He distrusted it too. A steward announced last rounds at the bar. The widow declared nightcaps dangerous for widows and then ordered 2. Shaw held up his glass to the pianist without looking at him and received a nod the way men exchange salutes across distances they do not wish to walk. Sister Augustine approached Jonas as the room began to settle. Up close, her eyes were the gray of cardigans and sea mornings, kind but not soft. Sister, you are not afraid of flying, Mr. Calder. I am not. Sister, you are afraid of falling. Everyone is. Sister, not everyone knows what it sounds like. She inclined her head as if he had confirmed a line in a file and moved on without blessing or judgment. Jonas watched her go with the irritation of a man accurately summarized by a stranger. Emery set his empty glass on the bar as though returning a borrowed hour. Emery, tomorrow we'll have weather you can see, sunrise as if the world has forgiven itself. You talk like a man who believes in second chances. If they exist, I mean to be ready. Ready for what? For them to be offered. He extended his hand, not as a politician does to own the room, but as a friend does to share it. Emery, until breakfast, Mr. Calder. Jonas shook the hand and found it steady, warm, and sincere in a way that often precedes disappointment. Until breakfast. Emery left with the couple bound for gossip, then lingered to ask the pianist his name and thank him for the right waltz at the right time. He added nothing to the tip jar. The gratitude felt earned, not purchased. Jonas pocketed the stray marble without meaning to, then returned it to the rail, as if something about carrying it would be a promise he couldn't keep.
Back in cabin 17, he folded his jacket with the precision men reserve for tasks that keep thought at arm's length. He checked the seam of the valise where the sealed folio lay. He tested the latch. He tested it again. He sat on the bunk and listened to the ship speak in sighs and useful groans. The Valkyrie was a faithful machine and a liar both. She would tell you everything is fine right up until the moment it isn't. But isn't that what all beauties do? Jonas lay back without undressing, hands folded over his ribs as if holding himself to the world. He shut his eyes and counted a breath for each person he had not saved. He slept less than that.
When he dreamed, it was of thin air and the sound of a warning he did not hear in time. When he woke at dawn, it was to a sky like silver paper, and a question walking the promenade in polite shoes. Has anyone seen Mr. Emery? Chapter 2, The Empty Seat.
Dawn broke slowly across the upper cloud deck, a thin sheet of gold stretching itself over the drifting white expanse below. The Valkyrie did not so much fly through the sky as appear to float above it, untethered from the world she had left behind. The windows of the promenade lounge caught the early light and scattered it in soft reflections across polished brass railings and lacquered wood. Jonas Calder woke with the peculiar sense that the world had shifted in some small but measurable way during the night. Not sharply, not enough to alarm. Just something had moved. Like a picture frame that had not been where it was yesterday, a scent that did not belong, a memory one expected to be clear but found blurred at the edges. He sat for a moment, letting the quiet of the ship settle around him. No voices in the corridors yet, no footsteps, just the gentle breathing of the Valkyrie and the low pressure of altitude. He dressed with habitual precision and made his way to breakfast in the dining salon, where white linen, silver service, and soft violin accompaniment attempted to anchor the passengers to civilization, as though the sky were not a place where civilization traditionally failed. The room was warm and gentle, sunlight filtering through tall windows. People spoke in pleasant, morning soft tones. Jonas accepted coffee and sat alone. He was halfway through his second sip when the murmurs began. Not alarmed, not frantic, just curious. Soft ripples of curiosity traveling table to table. He was here last night, I'm certain of it, wasn't he? I thought so, but perhaps I'm confusing him with the gentleman from the Cape? No. There was no older gentleman at our table. You must be remembering someone from your previous voyage. I'm quite sure. Are you? Jonas lowered his cup. The widow from last night, the one who had wept delicately over the consommé, was looking around in confusion, napkin twisted between her fingers. Widow, where is Mr. Emery? He said he would join us for breakfast. Her voice was light, polite, embarrassed to be uncertain. The two businessmen at her table exchanged glances. Businessman, there is no Mr. Emery on board, madam. The widow blinked. Don't be absurd. Jonas watched, waiting for someone to agree with her, someone to confirm what had been unmistakably real. No one did. Not one expression flickered in recognition. Not one voice spoke his name. Not one memory surfaced. Jonas set his coffee down, slowly and deliberately. It was not that they denied Emery existed. It was that they did not remember him at all. They remembered the laughs, the conversations, the charm, but not the man. The room was full of ghosts who did not know they were ghosts. Jonas rose. He did not rush. He did not draw attention. He simply walked out as though taking an ordinary stroll, though every step felt like walking into the answer to a question he had not wanted to ask. He made his way down the starboard corridor. The corridor was bright and quiet. Morning sunlight angled across the floor, catching motes in slow drift. The ship creaked softly in the gentle way of well-built things adapting to their environment. He stopped at cabin 22. He knocked once. No answer. He opened the door. The cabin was immaculate, not the neatness of a lived-in space, but the impersonal order of something recently reset. Sheets tucked perfectly, folded blanket, a single satchel arranged neatly on the rack, and sitting on the lower bunk, the boy. Small, straight-backed, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes open but somehow not waiting. Jonas stepped inside. The air in the room was cooler than the corridor, as though the window had been open moments before, though it now stood shut. The boy looked at him unblinking, as if recognizing something without understanding it. Jonas, good morning. The boy said nothing. Jonas tried again, softer. Jonas, Thomas, I'd like to ask you something. A small, almost imperceptible tilt of the head. Not curiosity, acknowledgement. Jonas, do you remember the man who slept here last night? Thomas's face was placid. His voice when it came was light, even, and strangely quiet. Not timid, just muted. This cabin has always been mine. Jonas's stomach tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. Are you saying he was never here? The boy's gray eyes rested on him, not challenging, not dismissive, but direct in a way most adults avoided. There was no one before me. Jonas took a slow breath. The cabin still smelled faintly of Emery's cologne, bergamot, and something warm beneath. But smells are the least convincing witnesses, easily doubted. Jonas crossed the small room and opened the wardrobe. A child's coat hung inside, small, well-kept, neatly brushed. It hadn't been there last night. Jonas touched the fabric. It was warm, as though it had been worn recently. He closed the wardrobe. He looked at the satchel on the rack. He unbuckled the clasp. Inside were a folded set of children's clothes, a small wooden toy boat, a journal-sized book with no title. He did not open it. He did not need to. This was not a child who had simply boarded late, lost track of, or misregistered. This was a child who had replaced someone. Jonas, Thomas, who brought you aboard? The boy blinked once. I came with the sky. A pause, a breath, a shift in the floor of the world. And where did Mr. Emery go? Thomas did not look down this time. He looked at Jonas directly, calmly, as though telling him something as factual as the date. He went back to where you didn't want to go. Jonas froze. It felt like the room tilted, though the ship remained level. You know where that is? Thomas's expression didn't change. Thomas, everyone knows where they are afraid to return to. He said it as if it were the most ordinary truth in the world, as if fear were a location. Not a feeling, a place. A soft knock sounded at the open cabin door. Jonas turned. Captain Marceau stood there, his face quiet, composed, unreadable as polished stone. He did not look at Thomas. He looked only at Jonas. Captain Marceau, Mr. Calder, if I might have a word. Jonas glanced back at the boy. Thomas did not move, did not change, did not look away. Jonas stepped into the corridor and closed the door behind him. He turned to the captain. Marceau's voice was low enough not to carry. I advise you not to mention what you remember to the other passengers. Jonas did not allow silence to become compliance. Why not? Marceau's expression did not shift, but for the first time, Jonas saw weariness beneath it. The weariness of a man who has been here before. Because this ship is held aloft by more than hydrogen, Mr. Calder. His eyes were steady. It is held aloft by agreement. Jonas felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Jonas, and what happens when we stop agreeing? Marceau looked past him, toward cabin 22, toward the boy inside. Captain Marceau, we don't. He nodded once, turned, and walked away. Jonas remained in the corridor. He did not open the cabin door again. He did not return to breakfast. He stood in the quiet, motionless, while the Valkyrie drifted higher into the morning light. The engines hummed, the ship breathed, and the sky waited. Chapter 3, The Passenger List. Jonas Calder remained in the corridor for a long moment after Captain Marceau left him. The polished brass rail was cool beneath his touch, and the floor beneath his feet hummed with the constant, patient thrum of the Valkyrie's engines, a pulse as steady as any heartbeat. The ship felt alive in a way machines were not meant to feel alive. He did not return to the dining salon. Instead, he walked the corridor in silence, hands in his pockets, thoughts working themselves into tight, unavoidable formation. The boy had said, he went back to where you didn't want to go. There were many places Jonas did not want to go. Only one of them was up here. The air tasted thin, not in the lungs, in the mind. The purser's office was located midship, just off the promenade's quieter end. The door stood open. Guests rarely visited unless they had misplaced luggage or wished to complain about the firmness of pillows or the lack of champagne variety. This morning, there were two women discussing the placement of deck chairs on the sunrise terrace. Their tones were light, pleasant, untroubled by the concept of rooms that no longer remembered their occupants. Jonas waited without announcing himself. The purser, Mr. Halifax, was a narrow man, neat as a ruler, hair arranged with the precision of a man who thinks symmetry is civility. He listened to the women with polite patience, recording their request in a small leather ledger with ink strokes so fine they were nearly calligraphy. Purser Halifax. Certainly, Mrs. Loring. I will have the attendants reposition the chairs before luncheon. The women left satisfied. Halifax closed the ledger, adjusted the angle of it on the desk, and only then looked up at Jonas, not startled, not surprised, as if he had been aware of Jonas for some time and was simply waiting for the conversation to become his. Halifax. Good morning, Mr. Calder. How may I be of assistance? No one had told him Jonas was coming. No one needed to. Jonas stepped forward. "I'd like to see the passenger manifest." Halifax's expression did not change, but something behind the eyes registered the weight of the request. Not alarm, recognition. "May I ask the nature of your inquiry?" Jonas chose honesty. "A gentleman I spoke with last night at supper is not present today. I'd simply like to confirm his cabin assignment." Halifax inhaled gently, the kind of breath that rearranges one's face into neutrality. "What name should I look for?" "Jonas." "Mr. Emery." Halifax nodded once, non-confirmation in acceptance of the conversation's direction. He opened a drawer, withdrew a bound folio, and placed it on the desk with careful, almost reverent motion. He flipped to the first list, a grid of neat typed names, cabin numbers, ticket codes, and embarkation stamps. His finger traced downward with steady rhythm. Jonas watched his face. Halifax reached the end of the page, turned to the next, traced again. His finger did not slow, his expression did not shift. Finally, he looked up. "Halifax, there is no Emery aboard the Valkyrie." Jonas kept his voice even. "We sat together last night." "I understand. We spoke with several passengers and the captain." "I don't doubt your recollection." Jonas said nothing. Halifax closed the manifest gently. "Memory is a delicate thing at altitude, Mr. Calder. The mind attempts to reconcile new environments with familiar patterns. The airship experience is disorienting for some. A polite explanation, a constructed explanation." Jonas leaned forward. "I'm not asking whether you doubt me, I'm asking whether you remember him." Halifax did not blink. "I have never met a Mr. Emery. No passenger of that name embarked with us." Jonas studied him, calm, professional, too professional. As if he had practiced this conversation before, he shifted tactics. "Jonas, and the boy in cabin 22? Halifax's voice remained even. "Master Thomas is recorded on the manifest." Jonas waited. "He boarded with us in London." "Alone?" "He boarded with us in London, Mr. Calder." The phrasing was careful. "With us, not with family, not with guardians, not accompanied. Boarded as part of the ship." Halifax closed the folio and placed a hand atop it, not protectively, simply conclusively. "Halifax, is there anything else I may assist you with today?" Jonas stared at the manifest. The paper was still warm from Halifax's touch. The ink on the boy's name was older than last night, not freshly typed, not altered, not added hastily. As though Thomas had always been there, Jonas stepped back, not retreating, recalculating. "No, thank you." "Of course, Mr. Calder, do enjoy the morning air. The view is particularly striking today." Jonas left the office. He walked. He didn't look toward cabin 22. He didn't need to. The corridor felt longer than it had that morning. The ship's hum felt deeper. The air felt fractionally thinner. A difference only a man intimately acquainted with elevation would notice. He found himself drawn toward the observation gallery. Passengers stood shoulder to shoulder at the long curved windows, gazing out at a world rendered small and harmless by distance. Above the cloud deck, nothing is sharp. Nothing is urgent. The world looks gentle from far enough away. The widow from last night stood near the rail, hands laced, expression dreamy as sunlight ribboned through the clouds. Jonas joined her. "Jonas, beautiful morning." She smiled. "It is, isn't it? I don't remember the last time I felt this unburdened." Jonas nodded. "Do you recall the gentleman you were speaking with at supper last night?" Her brow furrowed, light as a shadow crossing fabric. "Which gentleman?" "He sat beside you. Polished shoes. Good laugh." A pause. "Oh, you mean you were sitting beside me?" Jonas did not flinch. "No, I mean the other side." She blinked in confusion. Something like apology softened her face. Widow. "Mr. Calder, I believe you must be mistaken. There was no one between us." Jonas inhaled, slow, steady, measured. He nodded once, gently. "Of course." He stepped back. The widow turned to the window again, already returned to a world that made sense. Jonas did not look at the clouds. He looked at their reflection in the glass. And in that reflection, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw a second Jonas, half a step behind him, not mimicking movement, delayed, as though remembering after he did. Then a passenger walked between them, and the reflection dissolved into nothing more than light and glass. The ship's bell rang for midday promenading. Jonas did not move. Someone approached at his side. Not a voice, not a greeting, just a presence. He knew who it was before he turned. Sister Augustine. Her expression was calm, untroubled, as though she stood in churches built of air and cloud every day. You are beginning to notice. Jonas did not pretend to misunderstand. What happens to people who notice? She looked out over the white horizon. They stop asking whether something is wrong. A quiet, and begin asking how far wrong it has gone. Jonas turned to her. Jonas, how far wrong has it gone? She folded her hands. We are still ascending. Jonas's pulse tightened. Too fast? No, Mr. Calder. She turned to look into him, not at him. Her eyes held no fear, only knowledge. We are ascending into where memory cannot follow. A silence like the moment before descent, and some memories cannot afford to be left behind. She stepped away, leaving Jonas alone with the glass, the clouds, and the uncomfortable realization that he remembered Mr. Emery not by accident, but because something in him refused to let go, something that had refused once before, when it mattered and when it had cost lives. Chapter 4, The Boy Who Should Not Be There.
The Valkyrie had risen higher through the day, not sharply, not visibly, but by feel. Passengers didn't notice altitude the way the lungs did. They noticed it in thought. Conversations slipped more easily into abstraction. Laughter took half a second longer to arrive. People stared at horizons longer than they meant to. Jonas Calder felt it in his bones. He walked the starboard corridor again, slowly this time, hands behind his back, steps soft on polished teak. He was not drifting, he was circling. Cabin 22 was halfway down the hall. He hesitated only a moment before knocking, 2 firm, measured taps. The door opened almost immediately, as though the boy had been standing beside it. Thomas looked up at him, expression still, posture unchanged from that morning. He was a child in the technical sense, size, proportion, voice, but there was no child in the eyes. He stepped back without being asked. Jonas entered. The air inside the cabin was cooler than the hallway again, not cold, just thinner. Thomas sat on the lower bunk again and folded his hands again in his lap. Not nervous, not waiting. Situated. Jonas took the single chair at the small writing desk. He didn't lean forward, he didn't soften his tone. He spoke the way one speaks to someone who understands exactly what is being said. Thomas, I want to know something, and I want you to answer without guessing what I want to hear. Thomas blinked slowly. All right, Jonas, do you remember getting on this ship? A pause, not struggling to recall, choosing whether to answer. No. Jonas nodded once. Do you remember where you were before this cabin? Thomas's gaze flicked, not to the side, not down, but inward. I was with him. The air sharpened. Jonas's voice softened unintentionally. With Mr. Emery? Thomas did not nod, did not shift, did not provide the comfort of agreement. Thomas, I was with the man who wasn't supposed to stay, a silence, not tense, waited. Jonas, and now? Thomas's hands unfolded slowly, then refolded, a small, precise adjustment. Now I am with you. Something in Jonas's chest moved, something that had been locked in place for years. Why? Thomas tilted his head. Not curiosity, assessment. Because you don't let go of people when they disappear. The room felt smaller. Jonas exhaled once through his nose. You think that's a virtue? Thomas blinked, slowly, intentionally. Thomas, I think it is a wound. Jonas didn't move. Not a shift of muscle, not a flicker of expression, but the words landed exactly where they were aimed. They sat in silence together, not uncomfortable, simply accurate. The Valkyrie adjusted, rising through a colder, thinner band of atmosphere. The air felt still, not quiet, still as if motion had become optional. Jonas realized he had not heard footsteps in the corridor for minutes. He stood. Thomas looked up at him, not following with his eyes, just observing the motion. Jonas, let's go for a walk. The boy did not hesitate. He simply rose and followed. Not obediently, not submissively, included. They walked the corridor side by side. A steward passed them, no greeting, no nod, only a polite absence of reaction. Eyes sliding over Jonas and through the space where Thomas walked, not ignoring, not perceiving. Jonas slowed. The steward did not notice the change. He continued down the hallway humming lightly, no awareness of the child at Jonas's side. Jonas did not look at Thomas. Jonas, they don't see you. Thomas did not treat it as a revelation. Thomas, they don't see what they're not meant to lose. Jonas stopped walking. Thomas stopped exactly one pace afterward, like a delayed reflection. Jonas, why can I see you? Thomas answered without hesitation. Thomas, because you lost someone and you remember every breath of it. Jonas's ribs tightened. The ship hummed, and somewhere far above them, sunlight sliced through cloud in pale golden ribbons. They entered the observation gallery. Passengers stood at the windows, admiring the dazzling spread of sky below. Someone remarked on the way clouds looked like downy fields. Someone else wondered aloud whether heaven had texture. Jonas did not look at the view. He watched their reflections in the glass. The passengers appeared normal. But when Thomas stepped to the glass beside Jonas, he did not appear in the reflection. Not as a figure, not as a blur, not as a child. There was nothing in the place where he stood. Just Jonas. Sunlight, cloud. Jonas exhaled, slowly. Jonas, what are you? Thomas looked at him, not offended, not hurt, just clear. Thomas, I am what is left when something goes wrong in the sky. Jonas felt the air thin again. Not physically, in thought. Jonas, something is going wrong now. Thomas nodded, not grim, not aware, accepting. Thomas, it has been going wrong since before we took off. Jonas's pulse steadied, the way a man steadies himself when he realizes he will have to act again, whether he wants to or not. Jonas, what happens once? Thomas, the ship will rise into a place where memory cannot follow. He said it quietly, the way one might say what time dinner is served. And some of us will not come back down. Jonas did not speak. He looked at the clouds below them. He knew what falling from this height sounded like. He had heard it once, a long time ago. He placed a hand lightly on the rail, not for support, for decision. Chapter 5, The First Silence. The Valkyrie climbed higher over the course of the day, though few passengers could have said when. There was no turbulence, no sudden shift, only a subtle tuning of the air itself. Conversations felt softer, footsteps lighter. It was as though the world remembered sound only in outline. The ship passed above a great roiling expanse of storm cloud. Lightning flickered far below, a distant argument the sky had no interest in settling. Passengers gathered in the sundeck lounge, drawn to the panoramic view. The room was warm with golden light, the glass misted faintly at its edges, where outside air met interior grace. Jonas Calder stood near the forward railing, hands clasped behind him. He did not drink. He did not speak. He watched people. He watched what people forgot. Across the room, the widow stood with her cup of tea, chatting amiably with a young couple. Widow, we must have met at dinner last night, mustn't we? You seem so familiar to me. We did. You sat beside Captain Marceau. The widow laughed, pleasantly self-deprecating. Oh, but I recall sitting beside someone else, I'm sure. Someone with, oh, what was his name? I can't seem to place. Her voice drifted to silence mid-sentence. Not confusion, not interruption, just absence, as though the thought had never existed. The young couple didn't notice. They continued speaking lightly about Cairo hotels and the novelty of Airship bathwater. The widow smiled, polite as always, but her eyes were empty where memory had been. Jonas felt the shift inside the room, a quiet snap, as if a thread had been plucked from the tapestry of the world and neatly removed. No one reacted. No one except Jonas and the nun. Sister Augustine stood 3 paces behind him, hands folded loosely, eyes on the clouds. She said nothing. She did not need to. She had noticed too. A soft bell chimed. Afternoon promenade. Passengers began to move toward the upper viewing walkway, the one enclosed in glass like a greenhouse of sky. Their voices drifted upward like scattered petals. Jonas did not follow. He stayed in the lounge. Only when the room had nearly emptied did he turn to Sister Augustine. Jonas, how many times has this happened? She did not answer immediately. She watched a single cloud drifting past the window with a kind of gentle evaluation. As many times as the Valkyrie has made this journey. Jonas considered that. How many times is that? Sister Augustine exhaled. A soft thing. Too few to learn from. Too many to call coincidence. She looked at him then. Not directly, but truly. Sister Augustine, you are not losing your memory, Mr. Calder. You are remembering too well. Jonas's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. Because I know what it feels like to lose someone. No, because you know what it feels like to pretend you didn't. A silence. Jonas's breath was steady, controlled, but his fingers closed around the railing with deliberate tension. He did not ask how she knew, because he already understood. She had seen this before. Not the event, the grief, The light changed, not dimmed, not brightened, changed, as though the sun had briefly forgotten how to shine properly. The passengers on the viewing walkway fell silent all at once, not in alarm, but as though their voices had simply been misplaced. Jonas felt the stillness through the glass walls, even at a distance. Sound had not ceased, it had been paused, not muted, not quieted. Paused. The engines still ran, but distant. The wind still whispered, but delayed. Jonas felt it in his bones, the way one feels when a breath is not released, only held. Sister Augustine's voice was quiet, but it carried. Sister Augustine, we are entering the lair. Jonas had heard pilots talk of it. High-altitude atmospheric inversion zones. Rare, delicate boundaries where air density, temperature, and pressure conspired to create strange acoustic effects. Voices lost their warmth. Echoes emerged without origin. But this was not that. This was the absence of echo entirely. Jonas stepped to the walkway. Thomas was already there, standing alone, small hands resting lightly on the curved glass, eyes not on the clouds but on the people around him, watching them watching. Jonas approached. Thomas turned his head, not fully, only enough to acknowledge. Jonas, do you feel it? Thomas blinked. Thomas, this is where things start to slip. Jonas looked at the passengers. They were smiling, pointing, admiring the beauty of sunlight ribboning through clouds. They did not notice their laughter was silent, their conversation without sound, their footsteps without echo. Jonas heard nothing, not even his own breath. He looked at his reflection in the glass, and for a moment small enough to disbelieve, there were two of him. One half step out of sync, not mirrored, lagging. He turned sharply, the reflection corrected. The sound returned, not gradually, not fading in, all at once like a cut being undone. Laughter, footsteps, voices, air, engines, as though the world remembered itself. The passengers carried on, unaware that anything had happened at all. Jonas looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at him. Most people don't notice the first time. What happens to the ones who do? Thomas blinked once, slowly. They start asking questions. Jonas's voice was steady. And then? Thomas's expression didn't shift, not even a breath. And then they find out whether remembering is better than forgetting. Jonas looked at the sky. White, gold, infinite. A place where the world was too far below to matter. He did not ask the question forming in his mind. He already knew the answer. Chapter 6, The Captain's Warning. By late afternoon, the clouds below had thickened into a single endless continent of white. No shadows, no land, no sea. Just the sky, so boundless it no longer felt like height but isolation. Passengers dressed for dinner. Laughter returned in practiced, glittering shapes. The world, politely, resumed. Jonas Calder waited until the promenade had emptied to its edges and then walked the narrow stairway leading to the officer's deck, where passengers were not meant to go. The door to the navigation salon was open a fraction, enough to hear voices. Captain Renzo Marceau speaking low. His voice carried the weight of a man who had once believed completely in the reliability of the world, and no longer did. We stay on course, no corrections, no altitude adjustments. First officer, sir, the barometric variance is... Marceau, no corrections. Paper rustled. Instruments clicked. Someone swallowed hard. Jonas stepped inside. The officers looked up. One startled, one annoyed, one carefully blank. Captain Marceau did not turn. Marceau, gentlemen, you are excused. They left without protest. The door shut. Only then did the captain speak. You shouldn't be here, Mr. Calder. Jonas, then tell me why I came. Silence, still, heavy, entirely intentional. Marceau faced the large forward window, hands behind his back. The clouds reflected across the glass, smudging his outline into something that looked like memory. How much have you noticed? Jonas did not soften the truth. Jonas, a passenger vanished. A boy replaced him. No one remembers the man but me. The boy is not reflected in glass, and the ship crossed through silence that should not exist. Marceau closed his eyes briefly. Then we are already too high. Jonas stepped beside him at the window. Below them, the clouds glowed softly in the dying gold of sunset. The world looked beautiful enough to forgive anything. Jonas, what is happening to this ship? Marceau's expression did not change, but his voice did. Something old entered it, something he had pushed down for a long time. This is not the first time the Valkyrie has crossed this way. He let the words settle. Jonas waited. 6 months ago, on the Cairo-London return, we passed through an upper atmospheric shear, a convergence of thermal layers and electromagnetic refracting currents. Harmless, so the engineer said. He paused. People began to forget one another. Jonas felt his jaw tighten. First spouses, then friends, then themselves. He turned to look Jonas in the eyes. There was nothing theatrical in him, only exhaustion that had calcified into discipline. Memory is anchored by the world we know, by gravity, by place, by the simple shared agreement of reality. At this altitude, that agreement weakens. Jonas felt a quiet sting at the base of his skull. You're saying the sky erases people? No, a beat. The sky erases who they were to others. Jonas drew a slow breath. What happened to the passengers on that voyage? Marceau's silence answered before his voice did. Marceau, we landed with 28 fewer names than we launched with. Jonas stared at him. You're telling me 28 people disappeared? Marceau shook his head once. No, I am telling you that 28 people were no longer remembered. Their cabins were assigned differently. Their luggage matched different names. Their chairs were simply not remarked upon. Jonas felt cold settle deep behind the sternum. Why didn't you stop the flight? The captain's jaw clenched. We could not prove they had existed, and those who remained did not believe anything had happened. Jonas' pulse thudded once, slow and deep. Except you. Marceau looked back to the clouds. Except me.
The ship shifted, barely, but Jonas felt it. The way a man who has survived catastrophe feels tilt before instruments register it. Jonas, you're climbing again. Marceau did not deny it. I cannot stop the ascent. The Valkyrie is caught in the convergent thermal band. If we force descent now, we may rupture a lift cell. So we keep rising. Marceau nodded once. Until we break out, or something else breaks first. Jonas looked at the instruments. They were steady, calm, lying. What about the boy? Marceau's knuckles tightened behind his back. There was a child on the previous crossing as well. A pause. Jonas felt his heart beat louder. He appeared the moment a woman vanished. Was he seen? Only by one passenger. Jonas did not need to ask what happened to that passenger. Marceau answered anyway. Marceau, he was the last to be forgotten. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was imminent. Jonas exhaled. What do I need to do? Marceau's eyes met his, and for the first time since Jonas boarded the Valkyrie, the captain looked afraid. Do not let go of what you know. Jonas waited. There was more. The captain looked at him with something like warning, something like plea. And do not let yourself forget the boy. If he disappears from your memory, you will follow him.
A steward called down the corridor. Dinner service begins in 10 minutes. Voices gathered, footsteps returned. Reality politely reasserted itself. But Jonas Calder knew better now. The world was not returning, it was slipping. Chapter 7, The Quiet at the Table. By dinner, the Valkyrie had climbed high enough that the sky had turned a shade of blue so pale it was nearly white. The salon's tall windows reflected softly polished brass and candle flames that never flickered. The air felt dense and light at the same time, like the moment before a thought, not after. Jonas Calder entered last. He did not intend to sit among the others, but the steward guided him by habit to a long table set for 12. The guests arranged themselves automatically into the seating patterns they believed they had chosen. Sister Augustine sat 2 seats to Jonas's left. Nathaniel Shaw sat across from him, notebook closed but present, like an extra heartbeat. The widow took her place beside Shaw, hands folded, expression pleasant, composed. 2 businessmen seated themselves to Jonas's right, discussing oil futures as though the world they traded in were not already impossibly far below. No one asked where Mr. Emery was, not because they had forgotten something, because the memory had been replaced. A steward poured wine. The quartet played something light, something meant to encourage conversation without requiring it. And then the widow began to speak, softly, warmly. Widow, I was just recalling a story someone told me once, about a man who... She stopped. Not abruptly, not confused, simply empty, as if the sentence had dissolved in the air before it left her mouth. Her smile remained, pleasant, intact. Her eyes, however, had gone somewhere else entirely. Jonas watched her closely. Jonas, go on. The widow blinked, the kind of blink that resets the world. Widow, I'm sorry, what was I saying? The table smiled politely. Someone made a gentle joke about wine and short attention spans. Everyone laughed, light, careful, perfectly normal. Jonas did not laugh. He felt the silence inside the laughter, the space where memory had once been. The first course arrived. Clear soup, golden broth, herbs floating like restrained confetti. The businessman spoke of fuel lines in Persia. The honeymoon couple discussed Cairo markets. Two older gentlemen debated the future of transatlantic mail. Their words were real. Their connection to their words was not. It was like watching actors perform lines in a play where none of them remembered rehearsing. Nathaniel Shaw finally broke the surface tension. Shaw, is anyone else hearing the delay? His voice was casual, too casual. Jonas met his eyes across the table. Sister Augustine lowered her fork with slow, deliberate grace. The businessman did not look up. The widow smiled as though nothing had been said at all. The honeymoon couple continued speaking exactly where they had left off, despite Shaw's interruption. Shaw waited. No one acknowledged him. He nodded once. Understood. Jonas leaned slightly across the table. Not enough to draw attention, just enough for Shaw to hear him. Jonas, when did you first notice? Shaw didn't look at him. His fingers tapped once against the stem of his glass. Shaw, just now? But I think that's a lie. I think I've been noticing since we woke. Jonas nodded once. Jonas, do you remember Mr. Emery? Sister Augustine did not turn her head, but her eyes sharpened, a fractional shift like a shutter opening. Shaw exhaled, very slowly. Yes, which means we are already in trouble. Jonas did not ask how he knew. There was no point in asking questions about things one could feel. The second silence of the evening came without ceremony. The quartet played, bows moving, strings vibrating, fingers shifting with practiced precision. But there was no sound, not dulled sound, not distant sound, no sound. The room became visually noisy and acoustically dead, like watching a dance underwater. The widow lifted her spoon to her lips and smiled warmly at the conversation she believed she was hearing. A man laughed silently at a joke no sound carried. Shaw's eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition. Sister Augustine folded her hands. Jonas looked toward the window, and there, in the reflection, he saw himself again, a half step behind, delayed, not mirrored, lagging, as though memory were catching up to reality, not the reverse. The sound returned, all at once, like a room inhaling. No one reacted. Not one person acknowledged the missing seconds. No one, except Jonas Shaw, Sister Augustine, and Thomas. The boy stood in the archway of the dining salon, hands loosely at his sides, watching the room with the calmness of someone observing a clock winding down. No one looked at him. No one turned their head. No one reacted to the presence of a child standing silently in the doorway. Except Jonas. Except Shaw. Shaw murmured, barely audible. Shaw, he's not a passenger. Jonas did not look away from Thomas. He's the difference. Sister Augustine's voice entered the space like a needle pulling thread. Soft, even, measured. He is what remains when memory fails. Thomas's gaze found Jonas. Not pleading, not warning, not afraid, simply present. The candle flames flickered. No wind, no draft, just movement without cause. Jonas whispered, not to Thomas, not to anyone, but to himself. Jonas, how do I hold on? Thomas blinked, a slow, quiet answer. Remember who you were before you let go. Jonas's breath stalled. A hand touched his forearm. Sister Augustine. This is only the beginning. She removed her hand before anyone could notice it had been there. The boy stepped back through the archway. The candles steadied. The music continued. The world politely pretended nothing had changed. Chapter 8, What Jonas Lost. Night gathered along the corridors like velvet pulled slowly across a stage. The Valkyrie drifted steady as breath, her great engines purring low and even, the kind of sound that threaded itself through thoughts rather than around them. Passengers had retired. The dining salon was quiet, the promenade empty. Jonas Calder walked the length of the airship alone, not to think. Thinking was a trap. He walked to stay awake. Sleep was where memory lurked, where the sound lived. He found himself in the observation gallery, standing before a pane of curved glass 3 meters high. Outside, the world was not night, not sky, not absence, but white. Endless, luminescent, gentle white. Clouds illuminated by moonlight from above. A floor of heaven. A ceiling of nowhere. It was the kind of beauty that made the mind quiet in self-defense. Jonas placed both hands against the glass. The reflection that looked back at him was sharper than it should have been. The hymn of now. And behind him, just barely, a second Jonas, half a breath late. He exhaled. "I am not forgetting, not this time." A voice spoke beside him, soft, level, unintrusive. "Thomas, you say that as though you have said it before." Jonas didn't startle. Thomas had the uncanny ability to appear without ever feeling like he had arrived. He looked small, standing in the vast glass and sky room, but the space bent around him rather than past him. "I have." Thomas considered this. Not processed, not reacted, considered. "Thomas, tell me what you remember." Jonas's jaw tightened. "You already know." Thomas did not move. "Thomas, I want to know whether you remember it correctly." Jonas closed his eyes. The ship's hum vibrated through his ribs like a memory of sound. Not here. Then he had been younger, not in years, in certainty. A high-altitude test craft, two-person ascent capsule. He and Mikhail, the junior engineer, the one who noticed the vibration first, the one who warned him. "Jonas, listen." That's not the stabilizer, it's the intake pressure. Jonas hadn't listened, not because he doubted him, because Jonas had believed he knew better. He had been so sure, so damnably certain. Altitude does that, it makes the sky feel like certainty itself. Then, the sound, the wrong sound, a sudden snap of metal shearing under force, air rushing, pressure dropping. Mikhail's voice, not afraid, just calling Jonas's name. Jonas reached for the valve. Too slow, too late. The capsule spun, light and dark, sky and earth, up and down until up was simply the last direction the world existed. The last thing he saw was Mikhail's hand reaching toward him. Not to save himself, to steady Jonas. And Jonas reached for the emergency harness release, to save himself. Not them, not both, just himself. The fall wasn't the worst part. The silence afterward was. Jonas didn't realize he had leaned his forehead against the glass. His breath fogged the pain. Thomas stood beside him, expression untouched by judgment. "You have been holding on to that moment for a long time." Jonas didn't look at him. "It was my fault." Thomas didn't nod, didn't soothe, didn't contradict. He simply agreed with the structure of the statement. "Thomas, you made a choice, and part of you has been living in that choice ever since." Jonas closed his eyes. "If I forget it, if I let it go, then I become the kind of man who could do it again." Thomas's face softened, not into sympathy, into understanding. Jonas exhaled, slow, measured. "So I cannot let go." Thomas looked out at the glowing white horizon. "Then you are the only one on this ship who cannot be unmade by altitude." Jonas opened his eyes. "Is that why I still see you?" Thomas blinked, a single slow nod. "You remember what loss sounds like in the air." Jonas's heartbeat steadied, not calmer, more decisive. "Jonas, then what happens now?" Thomas turned toward him, very slightly, just enough that Jonas could see something like sorrow in the boy's eyes. "Now we find out who else is going to disappear." Jonas understood, without question, that Thomas was not warning him. He was preparing him. Someone screamed. Not long, not dramatic, just one sharp cry cut short from the upper promenade. Jonas was already moving. Thomas did not need to follow. He was already there. Chapter 9, The Shape on the Hull. Jonas took the stairs two at a time. The cry had come from the upper promenade walkway, the glass-arched corridor that curved along the top of the Valkyrie like a greenhouse suspended in endless air. Passengers gathered there, crowding the rail, murmuring, whispering. Not panicked, not alarmed, just confused. Confusion was always the first symptom. Jonas pushed through gently, not forcing space, just moving with the certainty of someone who belongs where he is going. At the center of the walkway stood a young woman in a saffron-colored wrap, the wife from the honeymoon couple. Her hands were pressed to her mouth. She stared at the far end of the promenade, where her husband had been standing, where he was not anymore. Her voice was thin, trying to remember itself. "Young woman, he was here, he was just here. He had my scarf, he said." Her words dissolved, not emotionally, literally. Her mouth moved, no sound, not even silence, just absence. Jonas reached her and spoke quietly, not comforting, not soothing, anchoring. "Jonas, what was his name?" Her eyes flicked to his, desperate, hungry for the answer, the way drowning hands seek rope, but she did not know. Her face collapsed inward, not crying, failing. I can't remember." Her hand shook. Jonas placed his hand over hers, a grounding touch, nothing more. Sister Augustine arrived beside them. No haste, no surprise. She placed one hand between the young woman's shoulders, fingers light, steady. Breathe. The young woman inhaled. Unsteady, broken, recovering. And then she let go. The grief left her face like smoke leaving a chimney. Her expression softened into calm emptiness, serene, untouched, whole again without cost, except for the memory of her husband, which was gone. Jonas stepped away. His chest ached, not with panic, but with the memory of a moment that had once reshaped his life. The moment the world asks if something happened, and you cannot prove it even to yourself. He walked to the forward end of the promenade. Passengers whispered behind him, not about disappearance, about the weather, the soup at dinner, the cost of silk in Alexandria. Memory was dissolving like ink in water. But Jonas's memory held, because Jonas had already lost something once and refused to let it go. He reached the forward glass, and there, on the outside surface of the Valkyrie's hull, a human silhouette, barely distinguishable, as though a person stood on the curve of the airship itself, hands resting against the plating, head turned toward the sky. Not clinging, not falling, simply standing. Jonas's breath did not change. Only his vision narrowed, sharpened, focused. He did not blink. He did not question. He simply saw. Footsteps approached beside him. Shaw. The journalist's voice was low, dry, steady, the voice of a man who has realized the truth and understands the cost of saying it aloud. You see it? Yes. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. Jonas kept his gaze fixed. Jonas, if you are, then so am I. Shaw exhaled, shaky, relieved, ruined. Then at least we're not alone. Sister Augustine stepped to their side. Her eyes settled on the silhouette. She did not flinch. They always appear just before the next forgetting. Jonas's pulse tightened. That's not a reflection. No, the silhouette moved, not by walking, by shifting, as though it existed at a slightly different rate of time, half a heartbeat behind reality, a delayed echo of a person, or memory, or something that once was a person. Thomas appeared beside Jonas, as always, without a rival. Thomas, he's not outside the ship. Jonas's voice stayed low. Then where is he? Thomas's gray eyes fixed on the silhouette. He is where people go when they are not remembered. Shaw swallowed hard. And we're going there too? Thomas did not answer quickly. He considered. Not everyone. Jonas turned to him. Then who? Thomas's expression did not change. Not warning, not sorrow, just truth. The ones who hold on and the ones who are held onto. Jonas felt the weight of that. It settled differently than fear. It settled like responsibility, like the moment before a choice. The silhouette on the hull shifted again. For one impossible second, Jonas recognized the posture, the angle of the head, the way the shoulder rested. It was the honeymoon husband, the man who had been standing in the walkway minutes ago, not falling, not erased, just becoming something remembered by no one. Jonas's breathing steadied, focus, not panic. Jonas, this will not happen again. Thomas blinked once. Thomas, that is the first thing everyone says. Shaw's voice was quiet. And the second? Thomas looked up at Jonas. Direct, unblinking, weightless, and yet absolutely grounding. The second thing is deciding who you will save. The lights flickered, not from power, from memory. The ship ascended, and the shape on the hull turned its head toward Jonas. Chapter 10. Jonas becomes the constant. The shape on the hull did not move again. It simply remained, an imprint of presence, a person-shaped absence, a memory held outside memory. Passengers drifted away from the promenade walkway one by one, their laughter returning in soft, reflexive waves, as if nothing had happened at all, as if nothing ever happened. But Jonas Calder knew better. Sister Augustine and Nathaniel Shaw remained beside him for a time, all three watching the sky through glass. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say that could be said in language. Some truths were pressure systems. They shifted the air, not the mind. Eventually, Sister Augustine touched Jonas's sleeve, not to get his attention, but to return some part of him to his body. Sister Augustine, come. She led them toward the Reading Salon, a smaller chamber paneled in dark walnut and amber lamp glow. A single oil painting of the Valkyrie in ascent hung over the mantel, its silver hull gliding into a sky identical to the one outside. The painting had been commissioned before the ship's maiden flight. It did not show the layer they were now crossing. Shaw sank into one of the leather chairs, running a hand down his face like a man trying to wipe the impossible off his skin. Shaw, We are witnessing memory collapse in real time. Purposeful collapse. Jonas. Not purposeful. Phenomenal. Shaw. Meaning? Jonas stood, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. Meaning the sky is not doing this to us. The sky simply doesn't care to hold us together. Sister Augustine nodded, the faintest smile of tragic agreement. Reality requires witnesses to stay real, and up here there are fewer witnesses than you think. Shaw stared at her. Then why are we still able to see it? Why us? Jonas did not speak. Thomas answered. He had appeared, not suddenly, but inevitably, standing near the bookcases, hands behind him in a posture too formal for a child. Because you have not forgiven yourselves. Silence, a deep one. The kind that has teeth. Shaw swallowed. Forgiveness keeps people in the world? Thomas shook his head. Thomas, no, memory does. But forgiveness decides whether memory holds or slips. Jonas felt the words land in him like pins pressed into a map. Sister Augustine turned to Jonas directly now, her voice gentle but firm enough to cut. You remember loss accurately. That is what makes you different. Jonas said nothing, but he knew. Thomas stepped closer to him, close enough that a normal child would have invaded personal space, but Thomas did not feel like a body. He felt like a presence. Thomas, everyone else aboard has lost someone, but they have told themselves a story where the loss was not their fault. He looked at Jonas, and for the first time his voice carried something almost like emotion. You did not allow yourself that story. Jonas's throat tightened. Shaw looked between them, and that's why he still sees you. Thomas blinked once. Thomas, yes. Jonas understood. He didn't want to understand, but he did. He was the constant, not because he was strong or special or chosen, but because he was unfinished. His guilt was a tether. His grief was an anchor. He could not drift because he refused to let go. Sister Augustine exhaled softly. Jonas Calder, you are the memory keeper now. Not for yourself alone, for everyone still on this ship. Shaw went still. You mean if he forgets, we all do? Thomas nodded. No one else here is heavy enough to stay. Jonas looked at them both, then at Thomas. He spoke quietly, the voice of a man who understands the cost before the task. Jonas, then tell me what I have to do. Thomas did not blink. He did not soften. He simply told the truth. Thomas, you must remember them. Jonas's breath tightened. All of them? As many as you can. Sister Augustine placed a hand over Jonas's. Warm, real, steady. The touch grounded him. Sister Augustine, memory is not held by the mind, Mr. Calder. It is held by the heart. Remember them as people, not as passengers. A bell chimed the hour, not a normal chime. A thin one, higher pitch, hollow. The Valkyrie was entering the upper boundary layer now, the altitude where names dissolve first. Shaw looked toward the door. Fear blooming now, not sudden, but slow, like ink spreading through paper. Jonas, what happens when the next one disappears? Jonas stared at the door. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. We don't let them. Thomas stepped backward into shadow. Thomas, almost a whisper. Many have said that. Jonas turned to him fully. But only one of them was me. Thomas looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then, Thomas, then we go now. The lights flickered, twice. A cold note of silence threaded through the air, as soft as breath, as sharp as a blade. Someone, somewhere on the ship, said a name, and then stopped halfway through it, forgetting, already. Jonas straightened his coat. The past he had spent his life avoiding had finally arrived to collect its due. He was ready. Chapter 11. The choice above the clouds. The corridors of the Valkyrie felt narrower now. Not physically, the ship was unchanged, but the air had shifted, thickening with something Jonas could only think of as pressure without weight. The kind that settles behind the eyes. The kind storms leave in their wake. Jonas, Shaw, Sister Augustine, and Thomas moved together through the passageway. Not in formation, not planned, just four people being pulled in the same direction. Toward the next, forgetting. They did not have to speak about it. They felt where it would be. Near the music lounge, where a gramophone was playing a waltz with perfect timing and no sound at all. The needle glided along the grooves in silence, a dance performed for memory that was no longer present to hear it. Inside the lounge, passengers stood and sat and leaned, each cradled in some soft, private fog. Their expressions were gentle, contented, untroubled. Reality was smoothing itself, rounding its corners. preparing to let something or someone slip. Jonas scanned the room, not for who was vanishing, for who was fading. There, near the window, the widow. Her hands, usually folded with practiced grace, now rested loosely on her lap. Her gaze was unfocused, not dreamy but detaching, like fabric unraveling thread by thread. Shaw whispered, voice thin, "She's about to forget." Jonas stepped forward, not fast, not desperate, deliberate. Sister Augustine placed a hand near the widow's shoulder without touching, as though proximity itself were an act of mercy. The widow looked up at Jonas. Her expression was soft, gentle, serene. "Widow, have we met?" It was not a question, it was a release. Jonas's chest tightened, not in panic, in recognition. This was the moment he had lived once already, the moment he had failed. No, the moment he believed he failed. He knelt, so he was level with her eyes, softly, steadily. "Your name is Margaret Ashdown." Her eyes flickered, not remembering. Remembering the act of remembering. Jonas continued, voice even. "Jonas, you married James Ashdown in spring. You wore ivory lace. There were lilies in the church. Your sister was late. You laughed about it every anniversary." Her hands trembled, just once. A single tremor of returning self. "Jonas, your husband died 3 winters ago. You did not stop loving him. You did not stop living either. You came on this voyage to prove that both were possible." Margaret's breath shuddered. Her eyes filled, not with grief, with recognition. "Margaret, I remember him." Jonas nodded once. "Yes, you do." The silence in the lounge shifted, like the ship itself exhaled. Passengers blinked, resumed conversation, laughter rising and falling, unaware they had left reality and returned to it within seconds. Sister Augustine closed her eyes, a prayer without words. Shaw let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thomas watched Jonas, not approving, not pleased, acknowledging. Margaret wiped her eyes delicately. "Margaret, I'm sorry, I just must have drifted for a moment." Jonas did not correct her. "Jonas, it happens at altitude." She smiled softly and returned to her tea. No one else noticed anything had occurred, but Jonas had done it. He had held someone in the world, not by force, not by control, by memory, by presence. He stood. Shaw turned to him. "How did you know what to say?" Jonas looked at Margaret for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was quiet, "Because I have been the one who was almost forgotten." Thomas's voice slid into the space, not echoing, not intruding, simply true. "Thomas, and now you understand your role." Jonas turned to him. "Say it." Thomas met his eyes. For the first time, something like gravity entered his expression. Not emotion exactly, understanding, acceptance. "You are the anchor, Jonas Calder. The Valkyrie will not remember her passengers unless you do." The words did not feel heavy. They felt accurate. Jonas nodded once, slow, iron settling into place. "Then I will remember them." Shaw exhaled, relief and dread mixed in equal measure. Sister Augustine bowed her head, not in submission, but in recognition of someone who had accepted what was already theirs. Thomas looked toward the far window, where the silhouette still lingered on the hull. "Thomas, we will have to choose again, soon." Jonas didn't look yet. He knew. "And next time?" Thomas answered without hesitation. "Thomas, next time the ship will try to take someone you care about." Shaw stiffened. Sister Augustine's breath caught. Jonas did not react. He simply lifted his eyes and looked at his reflection in the glass. There was no lag now, no delayed shadow, just him, steady, present, remembering. Chapter 12, The Descent of the Silent Sky.
Night pressed against the panoramic windows like a great black tide. The sky above was starless. The clouds below were luminous, glowing faintly with reflected moonlight, forming a soft, endless ocean of white. The Valkyrie floated between 2 infinities. Jonas knew the moment it began, not from sound, not from movement, from absence. A conversation in the lounge stopped mid-laughter. Passengers blinked, not confused, but reset. Names loosened in the room like threads coming undone. Shaw swayed slightly, catching himself on the back of a chair. "Shaw, it's happening again." Jonas stepped forward, not rushed, not panicked, focused. He scanned the faces, not for fear, for dimming. There by the observation windows, the young wireless operator, the boy barely 20, uniform jacket a size too large, eager to impress, eager to be useful, eager to belong. His expression was softening, like a candle's flame just before it gutters. Jonas moved toward him. Thomas appeared beside the boy, as though he had always been there. "Thomas, He is next. Jonas knelt in front of the wireless operator. The young man blinked slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Look at me. The boy tried. His eyes flickered, losing anchor. Wireless operator? I'm sorry. I don't remember. Jonas took his shoulders. Firm, but not harsh. Your name is Arthur Price. You're from Portsmouth. You enlisted because you wanted to build something that didn't destroy anything. The boy's breath caught. His hands trembled. Jonas continued. Slow, measured, precise. Jonas, your mother's birthday is in April. You send her postcards even when they don't reach her. She pins every single one to the wall anyway. Arthur inhaled sharply, his eyes flooded with returning self. Arthur, barely. I remember. Jonas nodded. Yes, you do. The world did not snap back all at once this time. It shuddered, like something resisting being held together. The boy steadied. The lounge returned to polite reality. Passengers resumed their quiet evening conversations, unaware anything had been saved. But Thomas did not step back. He stayed beside Arthur, watching Jonas. Thomas, there will be another. Jonas stood. His legs felt heavy, but his stance was steady. Then we'll save them too. Thomas blinked once. Not agreement, not denial, recognition. Thomas, but it won't be someone you barely know next time. Jonas exhaled. I know. Footsteps sounded behind them. Sister Augustine. Her expression was calm, painfully so. She looked at Jonas with the softness of someone who has already accepted something he has not. Sister Augustine, it will be me. Shaw flinched. No? Jonas did not look away from her. It doesn't have to be. Yes, Jonas, it does. She stepped closer, not fragile, unburdened. I have made peace with the world. You have not. Memory holds to unfinished things. Let me go. Jonas shook his head. Not denial. Refusal. I won't. I didn't hold on once. I will not let go again. Her eyes warmed, the first true warmth in the entire story. That is why you cannot save me. Thomas's voice entered, not cold, not triumphant, inevitable. Thomas, if you hold on to everyone, you will drown. Jonas's hands curled into fists at his sides. Then tell me which ones to save. Thomas met his gaze. This time, his expression changed. For the first time, there was sadness in it. The ones who are still becoming. Sister Augustine smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Genuine, peaceful, complete. She laid her hand on Jonas's cheek. You already know who those are. Anna's breath shook. I don't want to let you go. I know. She lowered her hand, stepped back, and in the time it took Jonas to blink, she was no longer there. Not gone violently, not erased abruptly, just not present. Like a word forgotten in a sentence. The lounge did not react. The passengers did not stir. Shaw swallowed a sob and covered his mouth. Arthur stood very still, understanding something without words. Jonas looked at the space where she had been. His voice broke once. Never again. Jonas, I remember you. And the world held, just for him, just long enough. Thomas watched him, eyes bright with something solemn and quiet. Then she is not lost. Jonas closed his eyes. No, she is carried. The Valkyrie began to descend, slow, graceful, as though granted permission. The world below returned, the clouds parted, and Jonas Calder stood in the center of the ship, steady, breathing, anchored, not unbroken, never unbroken, but whole enough to hold others. Epilogue, the landing that wasn't the same.
The Valkyrie descended through the morning haze as gently as a feather drifting to a tabletop. Her silver hull gleamed in the early light, immaculate, dignified, unchanged. As though nothing had happened. As though she had never hung in a sky that reshaped memory. Ground crews moved with well-practiced grace, anchoring mooring lines, engaging platforms, guiding her to a perfect, elegant landing. Passengers gathered their luggage, hats, coats, souvenirs. They chatted about Cairo and weather and comfortable cabins. No one spoke of disappearances. No one recalled anyone who was not here. Except Jonas. He stood near the disembarkation ramp, coat folded over his arm, eyes steady. Shaw stood beside him, notebook clutched under one arm, though he hadn't written a single word since the silence began. Arthur, the wireless operator, waited just behind them, hands in pockets, shoulders squared with new weight. They were not together. But they were not apart. Crewmen lowered the final gangway. The captain appeared briefly at the upper rail, looking outward, not downward. His eyes scanned the sky the way one looks for something that used to be there. Jonas knew better than to interrupt a man holding a private truth in place. He simply nodded once. Marceau nodded back. the gesture of two men who had shared something that could not be spoken. Passengers left in a gentle stream. Margaret Ashdown stepped out into the sun, lifting her face as though rejoining the world after a long winter. She did not look for anyone beside her. She did not need to. She had carried him as Jonas had carried her. Their eyes met briefly. A shared understanding passed between them. Not drama, not recognition, just grace. At the base of the ramp, beside a stack of luggage, stood Thomas, exactly as he had first appeared, small, still, hands folded loosely at his sides. But now he was looking up at Jonas. Not through him, not past him, at him. Jonas stepped forward, slowly, evenly. "Jonas, this is where we part." Thomas nodded. "For now." Jonas looked at him, really looked. Not as a mystery, not as a symbol, as a child who never had the chance to be one. "Will I remember you?" Thomas's head tilted, very slightly, in genuine thought. "Then, Thomas, you will remember that there are things worth remembering." It was the closest thing to a smile the boy had ever given. Soft, human. Jonas's voice was quiet. "Goodbye, Thomas." Thomas blinked once. "Thomas, goodbye, Jonas." He turned, walked toward no one, and was simply no longer there. No vanishing, no erasure, just absence. The same kind of absence that follows in the wake of a completed moment. Shaw exhaled. "Will anyone ever believe us?" Jonas adjusted his coat, not as armor, as acceptance. "Jonas, it doesn't matter if they believe us." Shaw waited. Jonas looked up into the sky. The clouds were harmless now, just clouds. "What matters is that we remember." Arthur said nothing, but he nodded. Not in understanding, in agreement. Jonas stepped forward. The world felt heavier underfoot, not burdened, grounded, held. He did not look back. Because you only look back when you're still trying to hold on. And Jonas Calder was no longer clinging to memory. He was carrying it. End of Book 1. Crossing the Silent Sky. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.